Good evening. Welcome to the Royal Review Live. This is our 21st cellar door-to-door. Tonight we're going to be looking at the hidden gems of Victoria. We'll have having 8 wines. Usual house rule applies. We'll look at 2 wines, have a talk about them one by one, answer a couple of questions, then go to the next pair. I hope everybody's ready. If you need to pour a glass of wine, do it now. We understand that many of you have already ordered wines directly from the winery. If not, just open a bottle and have a sip. Let's look at the first wine. So Vermentino. This Vermentino is the Santolin Costa Nostra Vermentino 2019. Let's have a little taste. So many bottles in front of me, it's a little bit awkward to pour, but I did have a sample of them this afternoon, which made it a little bit easier. Well, let's just so you can have a look. This is wine 1. Lovely sort of golden yellow straw color, quite pretty. I can already smell the wine in the glass. It's quite floral, lots of sort of citrus notes and just a touch of lees. For me, I know that it's going to be quite a refreshing style of wine. Vermentino's home is traditionally thought of in Italy. Have a look, have a sniff, have a sip. That's a refreshing wine. It's got really racy acidity, maybe sort of lemon, almost nutty sort of notes. For me, it's the texture. It's got this lovely sort of spice to it. This was ranked as a top ranked wine. It was also given top value. It was number 1 out of 20 wines for Vermentinos from Australia in the 2019 vintage. Obviously 2020, we're probably going to see a lot less Vermentinos, but you never know. It's absolutely gorgeous. For me, it slakes the thirst. It's really thirst quenching. Almost got that touch of sort of lemongrass. We do have a recommendation from the winemaker, and that is a food match would be Fregola con vongole, which is Fregola with clams, like a ball-shaped pasta. The winemaker's name is Adrian Santolin. For me, there's just a lovely sort of freshness to this wine. It makes me want to have a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. I think it looks good with and without food. Fabulous. Lovely sort of ripeness, almost tropical note about it. That's a good wine to start off with. It finishes savory, it finishes dry, and it finishes with just a little saline on the note. I do think Vermentino traditionally has a bit of a saline sort of finish, much like Fiano, and I think that that makes it great with food or on a warm, sunny spring day. Let's go. Vermentino traditionally is an aromatic white. For me, this has got a little bit of structure. It's medium bodied. There's a lot more Vermentino in Australia today than there ever was. It's planted in the alpine valleys. You'll find it's a very, very cool area, but they get an enormous amount of sunlight, and that's what gives it the ripeness. It's minimal viticulture, so the fact is they're trying to get the pristine quality of fruit. Enjoy. I think if you're going to have a wine similar to this, you want to have it with company, simple food, make it fresh, but also, I mean, when you're looking at the quality of this wine, it's got line, it's got length, it's got vitality. It makes you want to have another sip. Keep going. Excuse me for spitting. I will be looking at 8 wines, so I have to be a little bit more cautious. Excellent. Let's go to wine number 2, I think. Should pour a little bit less, actually, because I don't want to waste that wine. Here we are, Fallen Giants from the Grampians. So Riesling, this is a 2020 vintage. Obviously, we expect a lot less wines in 2020 in Australia. It's a little bit of a shame, but that's the price that we're going to pay for the bushfires. It's a great idea that if you can, try and support these small wineries as often as you can, even if you just buy a small amount. This is pale. It's almost water white. This is right at the bottom of the Grampians. I was really lucky. I actually just saw some photos of the vineyards of Fallen Giants today. It was purchased recently by Trevor Mann, I think. I'll have to look at that. I'll just jump to the next page. This is considered to be a top-rated wine. When you're looking at 2020 wines from Australia, it was ranked 10th out of 146 wineries. When you look at the Grampians, really, I think of a long history of sparkling wine, and I think of a long history of Shiraz. That's what seemed to have dominated the region, but clearly Riesling is doing a very, very good job in the region. Clean, fresh, crisp, citrus notes, classic Aussie Riesling. Very, very fine acidity, almost electric acidity. A little bit of lemongrass, a little bit of lemon oil, a bit floral, great line and length. This was actually given 95 out of 100. And the idea is we recommend that you drink it between now and 2029. I think that the Rieslings that we are seeing coming out of the Grampians right now are getting better and better. They've got a long history. When you look at the region and producers that you will find there, when they do Riesling, they make it a fantastic job of it. Minimal intervention, clean, crisp, pristine fruit. And the winemakers come up with a wine match of fried chicken, which I think is pretty good. I do think that when you're looking at something like this Riesling, because it's so clean, it's so fresh, you could have it with shellfish, you could have it with oysters, have it with prawns, you could have it with anything you find in the fish markets. You could have it with a tomato salad and it's going to look good. It has that lovely sort of phenolic texture that I do expect with a Riesling. I love the quality because when I think of Aussie Riesling, we go to the classic areas such as Clare, Eden, Great Southern for me. And when I look at what's coming out of the Grampians right now, it's more and more exciting. And each year it just gets better and better. I think it's an area to sort of watch for that. But, you know, we are looking at the hidden gems of Victoria today. It was a lucky find. We have had a couple of questions pop up. How many Victorian wine regions were affected by the bushfires? Well, there are 21 regions in Victoria. I think something like 17, because they're not directly affected with bushfires itself. That can be affected with heat, with stress, and sometimes the effect on in a vineyard is for 2 or more years. If they haven't actually decimated the vines themselves, it can damage the yield for the following year. We actually have a list of areas that were affected with the bushfires, which we happily will post on the Real Review a little bit later so you can have a look at it. But the fact is, if you have a vineyard and you lose that vineyard to fire, you often are compensated for the fruit that you've lost. But if you lose a vineyard due to smoke taint or heat, insurance doesn't really cover that. It's a much bigger sort of deal and it's much harder to prove and it's a little bit wonky. And ideally, we just want to support as many regions as possible, particularly the smaller producers. This is the Fallen Giants Riesling we're looking at. Next question is, what cheese would you have with Vermentino? Fantastic question. I mean, I do love white wine and cheese. I think it's fabulous. You could have soft cheese, you could have wash rind. Hard cheese, I often go for a big red, but I think that you can get away with hard cheese and white wine. I'd more likely to look at a goat's cheese, a blue cheese, or a wash rind. I think it'd be a fun afternoon, just with a little bit of fresh bread, maybe some apple, maybe some fennel actually. Fennel, Vermentino, and soft cheese is a wonderful sort of match. But it's a fun way to play. You can literally pick any cheese and then test it yourself. It's great to do with a large group of people as well. And what's the next question? The Vermentino, this particular Vermentino is from Grampians in Victoria, but often you'll find the home of Vermentino is actually Italy, and there's quite a bit in south of France as well, but in France they call it roll. Vermentino grows like grass in Italy, and I think that when you look at the Vermentinos that we are getting in Australia right now, you're getting higher quality. The producers that are looking after it are planting just a small amount and really babying it, so which is pretty cool. I think that when we look at things like this, it is a lot more fun. This is actually Alpine Valley, which is King Valley, very much central Victoria, just north of Melbourne. Awesome. Let's look at the next wine. Oh, here we are. We're up to wine 3. Wine 3 is the Mount Monument from Macedon Ranges. Let me just tip out my leftover Riesling. Macedon Ranges is awesome. It's very easy to get to from Melbourne Airport. It's pretty easy to get to from anywhere in Victoria. I think that they've got a huge amount of small family-run wineries. It's very, very small production. They concentrate a lot on Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. This is Mount Monument. The winemaker's name is Ben Rankin. It's a 2018 Chardonnay. And you see that it's just a light straw yellow. It's definitely got a Chardonnay nose. Instantly, you know it's Chardonnay. You know, a lot of people poo-poo the idea of Chardonnay, but I think the dark days of Chardonnay have definitely passed us by. When you look at the quality of the fruit that we have and the way that the fruit's handled, this is a whole bunch press. So literally they're extracting as much fruit profile as possible. It's had a wild ferment in old and new oak, predominantly old oak, to get that lovely sort of ingress of oxygen. It's had time on lees. It's been resting, I think it was a grow lees, and then racked off after about 16 to 18 months. This is a little bit cooler than I would normally recommend drinking, but I think we pulled it out of the fridge a little bit too late. I do like Chardonnay to be a touch warmer. Temperature of wine is really important. If you have something too warm or too cold, you can lose some of the flavor profiles. Particularly when you're looking at Chardonnay, I do like it pulled out of the fridge about 20 or 30 minutes before I drink it. I can already smell the nose from here. That's a moderate Chardonnay. When I say moderate, I mean moderate in body. It's not big and blousy. It just has this beautiful tight fruit. There's a tautness to the acidity. Lovely sort of soft spices, white nectarine, yellow peach, very much a classic sort of Chardonnay note. But for me, it's almost old school in the way that it does have discretion. We have a bad reputation for making big, ballsy Chardonnay, and then we went a little bit too light, too mean, too green. And now we have this sense of optimal ripeness over excessive ripeness. And I think that that's a better way to look at Chardonnay. You know, you should always have a Chardy party. Macedon Ranges also has quite a bit of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir planted to sparkling wine, but you'll see a lot more still and sparkling Pinot and Chardonnay at the moment. This is the 2018 from Mount Monument. It was rated 18 out of 165 2018 Chardonnays from the Port Phillip zone. It's also considered to be a top-ranked wine. And when it was tasted recently, it was marked at 95 out of 100. We do suggest that you drink it between now and 2030, which is in the next 10 years. And I think that when you have a Chardonnay that ages, the structure of this wine tells you that would age. It's the hint of tannin, it's the hint of grip, it's the freshness of the fruit, those secondary characteristics from the oak contact, but quite discreet, but also that fine acid line. If you're willing to travel around Victoria at the moment, obviously it's a little bit safer these days, I really do recommend hitting Macedon Ranges. It's a nice little local place to visit. Community is lovely. Sometimes it's quite a drive between one winery and another, but I think there's a beauty in that. When you're looking at the quality of the fruit that you're getting and the wines that you can get, you can literally fill the boot of your car with whatever wines you need. And our wineries need a little bit of support, I think. It's lovely. It also has what I would call noble reduction. It's just a hint of reduction, but I think it adds to the wine. I would actually love that wine with a little bit of paperwork. I do love Chardonnay and paperwork. I think it's a lovely match. Oh, here we are. We're up to the fourth wine, which is the Rosé. This is the Castagna Allegra. It's based on Shiraz, but there's just a hint of Viognier to it. It's been co-fermented and gently pressed. Castagna is a biodynamic winery. It's been around for quite a while. Julian Castagna is considered to be godlike when you look at the biodynamic industry in Australia. He's quite particular. In 2011, if you remember, we had an enormous amount of rain during harvest all over Australia. It was the summer that we didn't have summer. And rather than using chemicals in his vineyard, he chose to just let all of the fruit drop. So he's quite particular. And he goes to the far side of the moon when it does come to biodynamic principles, which is pretty cool. This is a savoury rosé, very much done in an old school style. It's been matured in old oak, large format old oak. Classically speaking, when you think of rosé, often strawberries and cream come to mind. I don't get that at all here. I get Aperol, I get young rhubarb, I get a little bit of ginger tea. It's definitely a more savoury style. Let's have a sip. That's bone dry. A lot of people miss out on having a rosé because they assume that rosé is going to be sweet. And the general rule was that if you have a dark rosé, it's going to be a sweeter style. If you have a dry rosé, it's going to be a paler style. Colour's got nothing to do with it. That's dependent on the time on skins. It's also dependent on the colour in the skins during that process. For me, when you look at an old world style, you look at the south of France, you're looking at a savoury, pretty style like this. It's just got a lovely sort of vibrancy, almost electric acidity. I think you could have this wine with or without food, and it would look a little bit different with food. I love the discretion in it. It's got lovely line and length. It just lingers on the palate in a really refreshing sort of style. It's quite smooth. It almost has that little bit of, when I think of Pinot, this is Shiraz, but when I think of Pinot, I often get that hint of bacon fat, and I'm getting that in this glass, and I think that's just from the purity of the fruit. It's a serious style Pinot Noir for men and for women. There's no gender when it comes to rosé these days. That's from Beechworth in Victoria. Beechworth itself is a very, very old town, old mining history, lovely sort of famous for its bakery, fantastic pies. But it's a classic continental climate, so they get an enormous amount of sunshine during summer, very, very cold, wet winters. So there's very, very little disease pressure. So they're not worried about the agrochemicals that you need to use. And there's a lovely sort of granite belt that runs literally through the heart of Beechworth. So some producers plant their vines on the Cambrian soils and some don't. If you're lucky enough, you certainly would. It's the home of Gioconda, Domenica, Sorenberg, Castagna, and it is conducive to biodynamic viticulture. Not everybody follows the idea, but some people practice it to the point that it's about much safer. And for me, it's when you have less intervention in the winery, less intervention in the vineyard, you can see in the quality of the fruit. And for me, that's a quality wine. We do have a couple of questions. Let's have a look. Does noble reduction have anything to do with noble? That's a fantastic question. And no, it doesn't. I use the term noble reduction because if you say reduction, people automatically believe it to be pejorative or negative. And I think that a touch of reduction can add intrigue to a wine and make it a little bit more. And so when I say noble reduction, I mean it as a positive. And it's like when you have those old Chardonnays from Burgundy, or if you're looking for an old Chardonnay from WA, it's that sulfur sort of aroma, like struck match, but it's just a hint of it. It's quite flinty. And I just use noble reduction to avoid people getting upset about it, really. Do many rosés have white wine in them, like the Castagna? Well, actually, no, not a lot, to be honest, but it's a classic match in the Rhone Valley to have Shiraz Viognier. Castagna actually make a wine in their stable of wines of Shiraz and Viognier, which is often co-fermented. And the idea is when you do a co-ferment, the colour actually stays a little bit longer and you get a lovely sort of floral note and it lifts the wine a little bit. You're absolutely allowed to use white wines in a rosé. In Australia, you're allowed to press rosé to press the color from the skins, or you can actually do a blend. In France, which is the home of rosé, you're actually not allowed to do that. You're only allowed to press the color from the skins themselves. So you would use a red grape. In Australia, if you have young vines, you might want to let them grow for a few years before you actually make a still Shiraz or a still Grenache, still Pinot Noir. You're right about the intensity of the fruit. You're right about the youthful characteristics coming through. So as a way to keep a little bit of money coming in the back door, you would make a rosé. And it could be that you're waiting for the vines to mature to add them to your flagship rosé or your flagship Shiraz or your flagship Grenache. So by making that rosé, it's still delivering a little bit of money because it costs you time and money and effort. It's a labor of love to look after the vineyard while you're waiting for that money to come through. So that's also another reason. Classically speaking, it's not common to see white grapes in a rosé, but it's not unheard of. That's a pretty good question. I've never actually been asked that question before, so thank you. That was Rosemary, I think. I do think that when you look at some of these wines, the Vermentino, the Riesling, the Chardonnay, and the Rosé, you just see the quality. For me, I mean, I looked at all 8 of these wines this afternoon, and I was really impressed with the quality. Australia has some of the most exciting wines it's ever had, and it's so great to put them on display. I will say that we don't actually have a food match from the winemaker. I think the winemaker is Adam Castagna, the son of Julian Castagna. But for me, I think this wine could go with pretty much anything. I would have it with a sausage roll. I would have it with light meats, pork or chicken. I'm less likely to have it with any sort of game bird because I think it's too rich and too strong. I'd be happy to have it with carbonara, sort of light pasta, a creamy pasta or a tomato-based pasta. I do think you could even have it with a classic sort of Aussie beetroot and goat's cheese salad. Be a nice match. The dark days of rosé have gone by, so you can always enjoy a rosé during the day, during the night. You don't have to wait till summer. You can have it in winter in Sydney because it's much warmer. And Queensland, you can have it 12 months of the year, really. This was rated 95 out of 100, and I'm just looking now. It's considered to be a top-rated wine, and we're suggesting you drink it between now and 2023. I would actually probably push that out to, I think that this wine can age. Classically speaking, you would drink rosés quite young, within the first couple of years. I do think there's such a lovely structure and quality of this wine that I'd be happy to drink it in the next probably 6 to 8 years. I probably might be peaking around that period, but by interest alone, I'd like to see what it looks like. You know, when we give suggestions on when you should drink a wine, they are only suggestions, but when you have a quality wine and you see a sense of balance, you inherently believe that it will last that little bit longer. It's a slow decay in bottle, and I should have shown this before, but this is the only bottle tonight that's actually bottled under cork. When we pour this today, this is a Diam cork. I'm not sure if you can actually see it because the name is quite small. And classically speaking, you would see Diam written on the cork itself, but there's a new feature for the Diam. And if you can enlarge that, or if you have bottles at home, it's got a small little number 10 next to the word Diam. So as a right of competition, Diam was really struggling with the idea that they're saying the wines aren't aging at the rate of a normal cork. And so if you see the number 10, and you can have the number 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 or 30 now, and only in the last few years, they're saying that's the best time to drink that wine. So in between now and the next 10 years. If it was a Pinot Gris from Italy, it'll probably have 2 or 3 on it. If it was a Grand Cru Burgundy, it's probably going to have 20 on it. If it has the letters GC, that's actually an indication of 10. But I love that. As a nerd, I love the fact that they went to that extra effort. And I found myself in the last 2 years constantly looking for these corks. I wasn't seeing them very much in the last 2 years, but in the last 6 months, all of a sudden I'm seeing the numbers a lot. So those wines are finally sort of rolling into rotation and we're opening them up. I think the youngest wine I've seen it with was in a 2020, but the oldest wine so far is 2017. So that's still very new. But, you know, I'm a nerd. I like that sort of stuff. Here we are. What's the next question? How long can you keep? Well, it depends on the rosé, Rosemary. If they're cheap and cheerful rosés, I'll drink them straight away. They're meant to be drunk young. That's the idea behind them. When you're looking at a rosé with quality and with structure like this, I think that it does have the ability to age, but that's a rare bird. going to 6 to 8 years, I think, is quite unusual, unless you're looking at Castagna in Australia. I think some of the Josh Cooper wines also from Macedon might age quite well when you're looking at the rosés. And a lot of the wines from south of France you can have with a bit of bottle age 6 to 8 years, but it'd be rare for me to have a wine over 10 years that's a rosé unless it's a champagne. And the next question was, what's the difference between Diam and normal cork? Oh, well, nerd alert. You should be able to see normal cork. It's quite distinctive looking, but when you look at Diam, I'm not sure what if you can see that very well. You see it's very, very small pieces. And essentially, if you're going to be very, very nerdy, they chop up the cork, natural cork, in very, very tiny, tiny pieces, and then they treat it with something called supercritical fluid. And the idea is by treating it with a supercritical fluid, it removes the precursor for cork taint. Cork taint is most commonly found from cork. You can get it from old oak barrels. You can get it from pieces of wooden implements in a winery, but it's nearly exclusively always found from a cork itself. The Portuguese cork industry are actually much cleaner and better than they've ever been before. So they're making a massive move to make sure that the cork I think they're terrified of what's happening in Australia and New Zealand, because we've been using these Stelvin lids for about 25 years. They use a supercritical fluid to clean the cork to eliminate the precursor for cork taint, but it's the same thing that they would use to make decaffeinated coffee. So if you have decaf coffee, they use that process as well. I like it. I do think that when I'm spending quite a bit of money on wine, I probably would prefer Diam if I'm drinking Barolo, Bordeaux, or Burgundy, just because I don't want to spend a couple $100 on a bottle of wine and then sit on it for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and then find out it's cork taint affected. Even though the cork today is much better than before, you never know. And so when I'm in a restaurant, I'll order a bottle of wine under cork because I think, well, I'll check it, or whoever's selling it will check it. And if it's not in condition, I'll just reject it. But when you have that at home, it's much harder. And if you do return a wine that you believe to be corked to a winery that you've purchased locally, they'll often replace it, but they replace it with current vintage, and you may have been resting on it for 8 years. Thank you very much. Hugh and Hook, tough for Castagna, wiped out by smoke in 2020 and rain in 2011. Well, I think Hughan's made a good point. I think that they're slightly mad, like in a really good way. I think madness is commonplace in our industry, and I find it wonderful. I find it really appealing. And it would have cost them serious money in 2011 to lose all of that fruit. The smoke taint alone, you're going to lose that fruit because smoke taint still comes in degrees. Even if you're not heavily affected by bushfire, smoke taint can be in a small degree or a large degree. And you can't actually tell when you pick the grape if it's been affected by smoke taint. You actually have to send it to AWRI, the Australian Wine Research Institute, get it checked. That costs time and money. You get it back and find out what the degree is. If you were to drink a wine made this year out of 2020 fruit that was affected by smoke taint, but only to a small degree, and you drank it quite young, you probably wouldn't even notice. When it's to a higher degree, you can notice straight away. But the longer that wine sits in bottle, even a small degree, each year that degree becomes more apparent. And I mean, less pleasurable, to be honest, which feels like such a waste. I think our industry really does need a little bit of love, a little bit of TLC, and I think consumers in Australia are doing their utmost to support Australian wineries, and I'm pretty proud of that. I think that that's quite charming and quite wonderful. It feels good. Okay, I hope that helped, Ewan. Cheers. Here we are. We've got 4 more wines to go. I might be a little bit slow, so I'm very sorry about that. This is the Brown Magpie Pinot Noir. This is from Geelong. It's 2018. Actually, I'll just tip a little bit more wine out. Today was the first time I've actually tried this wine. It was ranked number 8 out of 31 Pinot Noirs from Geelong. It received 95 out of 100, which is a stonkingly good score. It was rated, the idea is to drink now, in between now and 2030. I love it. I think when you look at this Pinot Noir suits every sort of occasion. It depends on your mood. You want something cheap and cheerful, which doesn't happen that often with Pinot Noir. You want something cheeky. This can sort of charm and disarm you. You want something with a bit of structure. You might want something fruit forward and savory. I think this is the more fruit forward and savory. And then again, you get the savory Pinot Noirs and the bunchy Pinot Noirs. The perfume of this wine is insane. It is. Honestly, it's marvelous. I think that when you look at the wineries that come out of Geelong, I'm not a fan of a lot of them, but the ones that do make good wine, they make a fantastic wine. And we smell like a bit of damson, a bit of beetroot, a bit of a sort of Italian bitters, almost a Campari sort of note. Really quite perfumed, truffly, a little bit of that sweet black raspberry. Have a sip. I mean, it's a glorious Pinot Noir. It's absolutely glorious. And I do think that when you're looking at someone, a family like Brown Magpie, they're really looking after their land, the viticulture. That's where, unlike if you go to shops and buy a tomato, if you buy a tomato and it's unripe and leave it on the kitchen bench, it will ripen over time. Once you pick a grape, it must be, that's the best condition it's ever going to be in, because it can only deteriorate from that moment. They're really looking after their vines and the land to make sure that they get the best quality fruit. And that investment takes time and it takes money. And, it also takes quite a bit of passion, which I think is pretty cool. We do have a wine match from, no, we don't have a wine match. I'll do a wine match. Again, I do think that often if you have a Pinot Noir or a Chardonnay, you can sort of blend the food. You can have roast chicken as a classic match. Monument, it'd be beautiful. But I could also have that with the Pinot Noir, but I'm probably more likely to have a lot heavier root vegetables like carrots and turnips and parsnips, because you get that rooty sort of earthy characteristic. This is an earthy, savory example of Pinot Noir, but it smells quite fresh. When a lot of people ask me whether I have a red wine, is it going to be a sweet wine? Red wine is nearly always a dry wine. It's rare that it would be sweet, but people mistake a sweet smelling aroma for a sweetness they might find on the palate. But also if you have a high alcohol wine with really ripe fruit, sometimes that sort of note, the alcohol is comes across as sweet. It's the sort of wine that I hate to sort of spit out, just because it's such a pretty, perfumed, cheeky example of Pinot Noir. Fabulous. Let's look at wine, 6. Again, we're back in Beechworth. We were in Beechworth before with a rosé. This is the Traviarti Nebbiolo. I'm not a super fan of Nebbiolo in general from Australia. I think we're just getting into our straps. We have a handful of producers that do a very, very good example of Neb. This is actually only the second vintage. Their first vintage was in 2017. The winemaker's name is Simon Grant. He fell in love with Nebbiolo, wanted to do whatever he could. And I mean, if I'm perfectly honest, I poured the 2017 in one of our restaurants across our group. This is the first time I saw the 2018. That was today. And I think it's such a Nebbiolo classic sort of varietally true example that makes it wonderful. For me, it smells like Earl Grey tea, a little bit of sandalwood, a little bit of that sort of cherry stone, almost that morello cherry sort of note. It does smell like fresh bark to me. Let's have a sip. Nebbiolo is, I have to breathe out then. It's got quite a bit of tannin. Like fantastic tannin. I do think that people associate Nebbiolo with Italy, and so they should. Nebbiolo traditionally has quite punishing tannin. This is a very young wine. It's only 3 years old. I'd still be happy to drink that, but I think it will also rest quite well. We have a suggestion that it will age in between now and 2030 is the best time to drink it. It was given a score of 93 out of 100. And ranked as 5th out of 16 Nebbiolos in Australia in 2018. It's considered to be a top-ranked wine. I think, it's the epitome of everything that is juby and juicy and sweet and savory and leathery and earthy that you want from a Nebbiolo, which is pretty cool. And again, Traviarti, Beechworth, continental climate, a lot less use for agrochemicals. 2020 wasn't a good year for them in that area, but that means that we can support them before and afterwards, and even during. Go to the region, visit the cellar door, buy some stock, go to the local bakery. It's pretty cool. We do have a couple of questions. What are the top 2 performing regions for making Pinot Noir in your personal opinion? You're going to get me into a lot of trouble with that, Rosemary. That's a dangerous question because it would absolutely depend on my mood. I do think that Macedon, for me, makes some of the most exciting Pinot and Chardonnay in Australia. I would probably then fall into Tasmania, Yarra Valley and Mornington. I think Mornington is exemplary when it comes to Pinot Noir. I think that Yarra Valley does a fantastic job in looking at wines that can age very, very well. But when you look at Tasmania, I mean, they've had a fantastic run. If you take 2019 out of the situation, because in 19, Tasmania was affected by bushfires, I think that the quality that you're getting out of Tasmania is the best it's ever been. You've got better winemakers down there, better viticulture, better clones. Everything is getting cleaner and smarter and brighter, which is pretty cool. Don't get me into trouble with the Pinot producers around Australia, please. They held a grudge. And I like to drink a lot of Pinots from a lot of different regions, depends on my mood. What's your favorite Chardonnay and cheese match? Oh, great question. I would have to say goat's cheese and Vegemite on white ghetto bread, or maybe a white baguette with a Chardonnay. That'd be fabulous. Got to be stingy with the Vegemite. It's the black salt. Get some goat's cheese, quite soft, maybe a little bit older. I do quite like to eat cheese past its use by date. I think it looks better then. With a moderate bodied Chardonnay. Beautiful. Oh, I could talk food and wine matching all night, Rosemary. Well, I'm getting a bit slow. I've got 2 more wines to get through. Sorry about that, people. I've got 2 more wines. I mean, I'm not so sure about the label, but I love this wine. This is the 2018 Malbec. It's actually been sourced from Heathcote. It's the Brown Brothers Origin Series Malbec. The home of Malbec classically was the south of France, particularly Bordeaux, around Cahors area. Now, traditionally, you think of Malbec with Argentina. And when I think of Australian Malbec, I think it's quite new. And I think that this is just a wonderful job, because often when you have Malbec, it's quite jammy and big and plummy. And we have a plethora of bad Malbec in Australia from international sources. We also have quite a few excellent examples. I think this is a brilliant example. For the price that you pay, I think it's smart, it's nervy, it's witty, it's moderate to medium plus body. Lovely sort of aromas. Instantly, I'm thirsty. For me, it smells like red and black fruit, a little bit of cherry. That purple sort of plum. I think it's 13.5%. And one of the nice features about this wine is, I mean, it finishes a little bit warm, a little bit savory, a little bit spicy. It's a vegan wine. You can have a vegan wine through using vegan finding agents, or by not finding a wine. And I think that, you know, people are really getting on board. They're wanting vegan wine, or vegan suitable wines, they're called. But this is such a pretty, cheeky wine. I think it's fun to drink. And, you know, it's very easy to say, oh, it's Brown Brothers, it's a big company, blah, blah, blah. It's actually, yeah, they make a large amount of wine, but they make quality wine. And if you look at, you know, this is something like $25 for quite an attractive red wine. I'd be happy to drink this in summer and probably in winter. It would be on the edge of a winter wine, but it's an easy red wine to drink. And also, actually, I traditionally, if I'm going to have Chinese food, I think if you're going to have red wine, can only be Grenache. I'd be happy to drink this Malbec with Chinese food just because of the spice. I try to avoid red wine with Chinese. And it's a hard thing to do. People often will just stick to beer. And I do love a Riesling. But I would take this on board as well as the Grenache. And I think actually it had my favorite wine match. It was from Catherine Brown is listed as the winemaker for 2018. And I think it's Jeff Alexander in 2019. But her wine match was barbecue lamb cutlets with chimichurri sauce, which is fabulous. I mean, that's just a fun, delicious wine. Fantastic. It was ranked third out of 31 Malbecs from Australia. It's considered both a top value and a top ranked wine. It was given 93 out of 100 points, and we're suggesting you drink it between 2020 and 2026, and I would agree with that sort of idea, but I love the idea. It finishes nice and dry. That tannin is remaining on the palate. And I think that that's what, it just cleans up the palate. When you've got that acidity and that tannin, it just shows you it's got a little bit of structure. A lot of people think that when you have a less expensive wine, that it's a poor quality wine. That's absolutely not true. Oh, here we are. Here's the big wine of the night. From 1860, let me just empty that glass, sorry. From 1860 Vines. This is Tahbilk. I was just talking to somebody this afternoon about this winery. I remember going to this winery quite a few times as a kid. I used to live in Melbourne, and as an adult, I've also been several times. It has legacy, it has history. It's a carbon neutral winery. It's been carbon neutral since about, since about 2012, 2013. If you think about all the work goes into transporting bottles, wine, water, machinery, tractors, compacting the earth, all of these features. I love the idea that the Tahbilk family, who are part of the first family of wine, are really making sure that they're looking after the earth. You know, it's really important to them. This winery was established in 1860, but they purchased the winery itself in 1925. And right now the CEO and the current winemaker is fourth generation, which is pretty cool. That's Alistair Tahbilk. He came up with a food and wine pairing, and that was medium rare ribeye steak, marinated kangaroo fillet or Gruyere cheese. This is quite a powerful wine. It's savory, it's dry. I could smell it the second I poured it into the glass. When you're pouring wine, you can already smell it. That's a powerful sort of note. It almost has sort of Nebbiolo characteristics to it, which is like wood, earth, leather, tannin, that sandalwood, which for me is oak contact. It's part of the wine as opposed to being separate to the wine. And I think that over time, the fruit will absorb that oak. Sweet spices, a bit leathery. I would have expected it to be quite peppery because it's a cool climate Shiraz, but actually I just get ripeness of fruit. And I think the tasting note I read said old boots, which is very much a Len Evans note. It makes me smile every time I think about that. Dry, savory. It's quite, I would consider this to be an old world style Shiraz, almost old Australian Shiraz. You're looking at that lovely sort of purity of fruit. It is full body, but there's a lovely balance. It doesn't feel heavy and clunky. It still has a freshness to it. This is 6 years old. It's still quite youthful. I can still see those primary notes. I can see the secondary notes from the oak contact, and I can see the tertiary notes are coming around the corner. I would love to see this wine in 10, 20 years, 15 years. I do think that it's going to mature very, very well. This was rated as a top-ranked wine. It was ranked as 5th out of 46 in the 2015 Shiraz from Central Victoria. Central Victoria is well known for Shiraz, for Marsanne. I do think that when they get it done well, they do a fantastic job. 95 out of 100. I might kick it to 96 just because when you're going to have a gold star wine, you want it to stand apart, and I think it's fabulous. Drink now from 2022 to 2040. Well, I would 100% agree with that note. I do think that this wine is definitely going to age for the next 18 years. It's the A-frame of the wine. It's the tannin, the fruit, the acidity, the length on the palate. I think it's going to look better. I think that this wine is under Stelvin Cab, but when you look at these wines, and you know that right now we're looking at them in their infancy. It's 6 years old. It still looks really young and fresh. It's going to look better in 5 to 10 years' time. It's something that you want to buy and then rest on. You know, it's a wonderful sort of feature. I quite like that. I do think that you need to have a savory wine and more. This is full body, but there's a sense of moderation. And for a wine to age for a long time, you don't want a fruit bomb. You want something like this. Wonderful. It was fun. We have another question. Are there any Australian regions that are very notable for Malbec, particularly for aging? No, not at the moment. I know that there's actually an enormous amount of Malbec in Langhorne Creek. And often Malbec is actually put inside Cabernet blends. So a proportion is different. You get small amounts, big amounts. I do think that if you're going to have an age-worthy Malbec, I'm not sure that Langhorne Creek is going to be what I would call age-worthy, but I think that it will certainly survive 5 to 8, maybe 10 years. You also get a little bit of Malbec in Riverland and Riverina. These are areas that people don't like to talk about because they're bulk production, but essentially these areas have very, very little disease. So they're less touched by chemicals, so that's pretty cool. I can only think of, I know that there's Malbec in Barossa, but often I think it sort of falls into the fortified wines. If you're going to look for a straight, still dry Malbec, it's probably going to be Langhorne Creek. Do we have any more questions? Anything that I can do for you? I did miss the food and wine match, so did I? No, I didn't. Alistair Pulbrick, 4th generation CEO. I'd be happy to enjoy his wine match with this dish. But I do think that when you look at our history of Australian wines and the Shiraz that we do have, these vines are from 1860. We do have vines that are a little bit older. We have some of the oldest Shiraz vines in the world, and that's something that we should be really grateful for. But look at the quality you get out of it. Cheers, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Hidden Gems.